Hello, and welcome to, well, what would battleship and cruiser guns look like if modern technology was applied to them? And, well, for this video, it's an interesting one to discuss. It's an interesting one to discuss in normal, but for this scenario, it's kind of interesting to think about, because are we talking about modern technology as in if we were building a battleship and battleship and cruiser today, in which case we can sort of tell what guns would look like because we can pretty much scale up current guns, or if we applied it to previous generations, and what technology would we apply? Myself, I'm going to limit this to the barrel technology and the fire control technology in terms of making guns automatic and making our targeting as good as possible. And I'm going to see what we can do, but we can't. I don't have a simulator which I can show you all, which could allow me to attach things like laser guidance to the rounds. Let's be honest. If you're within radar range, if you're prepared to put a laser sight up high enough and give it enough power, you can probably introduce laser targeting and guidance fins to the shells. Having guidance fins that would actually survive a shell launch is potentially interesting, but there again, the amount of recently been looking at when I went to the Navy, the Defense Leaders Future Navy Conference, the amount of different shells I saw which have that system and have variations of that system, where they have some of them even were anti-submarine warfare shells, which were literally shells inside shells. Literally, you had the shell cover, and when that had a small charge to blow off, then you had this guided one, and sabot rounds, etc. There are systems you could design that would protect the fins. It might not be that a 16-inch gun would fire a 16-inch guided shell. It might be that a 16-inch gun would fire a 14-inch guided shell in a 16-inch package which splits off and then fins come out. That's still going to do damage. Let's be honest, that's still going to do damage, and if that's 100% guaranteed every time, every single shell in that salvo is going to hit that ship, you're not going to care much. You're going to go, yes, I have to use an inch of the outside to cover and protect it. But that don't bother me. It could even be that it is actually a full 16-inch shell, and it's only, let's say, the back third which splits off, revealing the guidance fins, or variations thereof. So there are lots of interesting ideas, but the trouble is, shameless book plug. If you want to know more about the start of the modern destroyer, a historian has to eat. A historian has to eat. So, this, by the way, is one of those mystical guns which were designed for the Sovietsky Soyuz, i.e. the Project 29. They're interesting. The Project 23, I mean. Yeah. That's what I call them, the Project 29. It's because the battle cruisers are the Project 69s. Those Russians, always ahead of their time, but leaving that to one side. There's a lot of testing and development which goes into guns. There is a lot of testing and development which goes into guns. And to put bluntly, what we're talking about, and we're going to talk about in this video, is we are going to be talking about the gun technology and the gun shaping. And I'm going to run through a simulation of what ships with modern, or as close as I can approximate using the software, to modern guns would how they perform against ships without the equivalent. Okay. So, without much further ado, I have to go hand wavium, hand wavium, hand wavium, and so you've probably seen the starting position again, but yes. The question as defined, and I'm going to be very careful about the question as defined. The question as defined was gunnery technology, as in that relating to guns specifically. is sent back in time. I.e., what would we have if modern gunnery technology had, for whatever reason, kept pace with the large caliber guns of battleship, the sort of great guns? What do you have in World War II if you could go back and give them our gunnery tech? Now, here is the problem with you at Ultimate Admiral Dreadnoughts. I can give them, to an extent, an increase in the gun length. I can make them automatic, so I can therefore have increased rate of fire. I can give them radar and fire control which are appropriate for the period, so that's going to stay the same. What I can't necessarily do is give them the same angle of fire as we would most likely see if we applied modern technology to past ships. There is a level to which I can give that. There is also a level to which you couldn't really get any more than you got at certain points in time. There's a reason I'm going to set this to 1940, which is the most advanced date. You could have possibly got large guns, like the vessel we are seeing in front of us, up to somewhere approaching 55 degrees. I honestly doubt you would get them more than that. There is some interesting science fiction I've read where you have battleships like this which have the ability to get their guns up to 85 degrees. I don't think that's ever likely. Not based on current technologies and loading dynamics. And you would have to have the turret being so massive. And you'd also go, okay, for a spaceship I can understand the necessity for it. But for a ship which is floating on the sea, at what point is it going to be using its guns to engage a target and be required to fire at that angle? Because let's think about this. Think about this from the perspective of a sensible person. If I'm firing at that angle, that means I'm going for a shot which is coming down from above. Now this is going to be quite close range one, because if I fire at this sort of angle, I can come down from above hit the target, and I can penetrate deck armor. But if I'm firing at this angle, I'm definitely going to be hitting deck armor, but I'm also going to be quite close range. Hang on, at that point, at that range, if I fire level and straight, I'm probably going to still penetrate that ship. Because let's be honest, it's going to be close enough that the armor just doesn't matter. This is one of the things which is difficult to explain with battleships, and why when people turn to me and go, top trumps, and say, this ship has more armor, I go, great! Does that armor make it invulnerable? No. What our armor does is it buys you first round survivability. That is what armor provides you with. It's first round survivability against a certain caliber at a certain range. If you're hit by a larger caliber at the same range, you could be okay. If you're hit by the designed for caliber at a shorter range, you could be okay. But the odds are, even if you're hit by the design for caliber at the design for range, that is going to give you survivability for the first round. Next round may get through if it hits within a close enough area of the first hit. Probably won't hit within a close enough area, so probably won't get through. However, the third round, which hits in roughly the same area as those first two rounds which have hit there, and this may be across multiple salvos that you've accrued those hits in that roughly area, will get through, because the armor will be sufficiently beaten up by the other hits that it's not going to offer you any protection. It's just not. If I hit something with 4-5, this is the point I usually use demonstrating. When I take this into university lectures, people do look at me funny, but it works, okay? So if I call my sledgehammer 4-5, because it's 4.5 kilograms, and because 4.5 inch, and it just 4-5. Plus, I then get to say, I will engage with 4-5. And I am a big enough kid that I enjoy that. Okay, so. If I hit something with 4-5. Quite often they go down first or a hit. But if it's strong enough, it will survive the first hit. Very rarely does it survive a second. But if it does survive a second, then the third is probably going to slam it. That is armor. And that is 4-5. So that is what we're about. So, I'm going to start off with a very interesting battle for you. I'm going to start off with Britain versus Japan. Okay? So I'm going to introduce you to the Japanese vessel first. The Japanese vessel is, of course, Yamato. Now, she's a slightly better armoured version of Yamato, I must admit. Because, well, she has a pretty much solid belt the whole way through. I haven't really worried much about the aft weight offset. I could probably... I can't add any more weight because then I'll go over my weight limit. And she is slightly heavier. But if you notice, she's got an inner deck 4 inches thick, 2 inches thick, and then 1 inch thick. Inner belt 8 inches, 4 inches, 2 inches. So she's a heavily armoured vessel. But, more importantly, her guns are 18.1 inch 45 cal, as historically fitted. She has the Gen 2 radar, which fits roughly equivalently to what they would have had. And if I fit it with the Gen 3, it goes overweight fast. So Gen 2 is roughly accurate. So this is Yamato as accurate as I can make it in Ultimate Admiral Dreadnoughts. Even has a tiny funnel. As you can see, these are the 6-inch guns, these are the 5-inch guns. She actually has slightly more 5-inch firepower than she did historically, but, you know, I felt like being generous. And because, well, I wasn't going to fit her with her 1.5-inch guns. Honestly, I was just not going to fit her with the 13.2mm and those small guns. I just couldn't fit her with. I just couldn't. I couldn't bring myself to fit her with the machine guns. I'm sorry. For starters, and I've had to take a second at this gun. And let's put them in. And then take them down to as... well, they are technically 1-inch guns. So I've taken them down to 1.1 inch. And these are, of course, the Type 96. They're supposed to represent. And they are supposed to be 60. Okay. 60 cal. Now, these are currently 30 cal. They're now 33 cal. There isn't really much point in them. They're going to cost more in weight than they cost in any reason to actually carry them. But I suppose historically it is more accurate to have them. What's her cruising range? Cruising speed is 17.1 knots, and she can do 12,000 kilometers at that range. Her historic cruising range was 13,300 kilometers at 16 knots. So that takes it way over. That leaves it about right. Suppose I could take that down to standard. That doesn't give her much more. Does give her a lot of weight left. Half weight offset is still massive though. But I have built this ship to be about as heavily armoured as I can. And so, I have no qualms using this as my gunnery target. And it is being used as my gunnery target. I do admit this. Now, my ship is the King George V if you'd had modern technology, and this is what Chatfield really envisaged it would be, okay? Chatfield was hoping to have a 14-inch automatic gun. The fact we couldn't technologically make them at the time doesn't matter. This is a 59 caliber gun. So again, it's not as big as we could probably build today. Probably today, if we were using modern technology and really had kept developing these guns, we're probably talking 60, maybe even 70 cal guns. Okay? Now, I've put super heavy shells. They do come with more gun barrel erosion. So, again, this is something which is going to be a factor in your designing of your shells and designing your guns. You could go with heavy shells. You could go with heavy shells rather than super heavy. But these have the maximum gun range, have the maximum penetration, the maximum shell damage, and as such, you have to say, are probably the sensible guns to go with. They probably are. Now, let's do that for the secondaries. Does give us a bit more weight. After weight offset, 8.7%. The aft is heavier than the forward. And the pitch is pretty darn big. But if I take it down by enough to start to really have an impact on the pitch... let's take the draft down a bit. Okay. It also reduces our target height a bit. But broadly speaking, I'm happy with both ships. They are as close as I can make them to historically whilst still maintaining this level. And this level is the modern tech. And it's supposed to be MGT, but it reads MT because I'm not mucking at doing any other modern tech experiments on my battleship line in 1940 at the moment, so this is just left as MT. And there is a Duke of York. Now, the Duke of York, well, you'll notice that's pretty much the same as this ship, but it's got four quad 14-inch guns. And depending on how long this takes, and sometimes it's quick, sometimes it's not so quick, I have managed to actually blow the turret off the Yamato a couple of times in testing to test this out, because I didn't want to do a video and then go, oh, yeah, this one actually didn't work. It worked in theory, but didn't work in practice. That would have been a bit worrying. It would have said I suggested I set it up incorrectly. So I did build this, but I also built this just in case. And if we have the time, i.e. it doesn't take a full hour, I will also do a video with this. or we'll use this in part of the video. So, let's start the battle, shall we? Now, I am going to do one thing. I'm going to give the AI control, as I normally do, to try and make this more balanced. And I'm going to put the 14-inch guns onto save. The reason I'm going to do that is because if you put it in normal, it sticks at about 45... Well, it has been trying to stick at 45 kilometers range, which is lovely and is viable. But the thing is, and this is something as you would realise if you were if you were not an AI, is that whilst in theory you can penetrate at 45 kilometers, eventually if you hit enough targets accurate enough, you're more likely to do it at roughly 30 kilometers, which is just outside of range of their 18-inch guns, I know, for the Yamato, but yeah, you hang around at 30 kilometers, you're likely to get some penetrations. You hang around at 45 kilometers, you're not going to get penetrations. It's like you also can turn the speed down to the cruising speed, and you're more likely to start getting accurate hits and cause a lot more damage. Let's go see our Yamato friend. Now, this is broad daylight. This is the best firing conditions for both ships. It's completely clear. I will say I have done this, I have done recordings, and, well, not recordings, but I've done this simulation in storms and all sorts of things. And in storms, it can be interesting, because in a storm, if the 18-inch guns get close enough, they will still cause damage. The 18-inch guns get close enough, they cause damage. And that's really the point to make in this scenario. The whole thing, the survivability chance of the King George V, really in this scenario does survive in a one-on-one fight with a Yamato on the fact that it is a very long-range gun. And it can do a lot of damage at long range. Again, it's trying to keep it 40 kilometers, and that doesn't really work from a penetration perspective. Now the thing is, the Yamato, if we click on her 1.1 inch has a range of 9.9 kilometers. Her 5 inch has a range of 15 kilometers. Her 6 inch has a range of 23.5 kilometers. Her 18 inch a range of 28 kilometers. As long as you keep out of 28 kilometers range. What's happened to you? Yep. Zinking. I presume something has the fires, extensive fires. It happens. If you want to, we can run that again, but I would prefer and thought you might all enjoy far more if we run it with... Well, actually, let's run it again. Let's run it again so you know it's on a... Let's go to exit constructor. Let's go set the weather to cloudy. Actually, let's set it to random. Design ship. And let's see what comes up. And let's run it again. Exactly the same as before. We have a Yamato. Again, I'll put it down to flank speed. So not maximum division speed, it's best accuracy for shooting speed. Because it can afford to, because it's engaging at such a range. At this point, the advantage for the enemy battleship would probably be to try and charge it. And I am literally aiming to cross the stern of the ship, yes. But remember, my target is always to keep out of 28 kilometers range. So I'm happy to go down to 30 kilometers range, because that still gives me plenty of space. Now I turn it back onto the AI, leave the AI to keep it at a sort of range. Roughly 28 kilometers range. Its range, as remember, is roughly 26. So keeping it above 30 gives me a 4 kilometer range. I've always estimate for 28 kilometers because, again, I'm dealing with 18.1 inch guns. I don't want to get close to them. I don't. Because I'm not armoured to take an 18.1 inch gunfire. I'm not. Now, theoretically, have crossed into that range where I can be engaged, and ideally I want to get out of that range as quickly as possible. So 25.6, 25.7. Yeah, now I'm at 26.2.3 and go back to AI control. Because I want to keep out of range of those 18-inch guns. I want to cause as max damage. And this is the whole thing again. As I've always tried to explain with gunfire, and I think I've already explained in this video, you want to keep your enemy at the best range for you. So the best, yes, my maximum range of gunfire is 58 kilometers, but at 58 kilometers, I can't really penetrate that armor. That's not going to work for me. But at 26 kilometers, his guns can hit me, and they're 18-inch shells, And as much armour as I have, if they find a right spot, they can cause me a lot of damage. If they manage to hit by fluke one of the gaps, as that shell just did there, between the gun turret and the deck, that can cause a lot of damage. An 18-inch shell hitting there can cause trouble. It can get into places which are going to cause me trouble and pain. I don't want to get that close, and I don't need to get that close. She's sinking due to extensive fire. She's just basically entirely burning from the inside out. Ammunition cooks though. And you can run this again and again. If you want to set this up, I'll go through the design steps, as you can see, of these ships, and you can run them. And yes, by the way, Yamato does win occasionally, usually in a stormy weather. But as you can see, there is nothing too excessive I have fitted on this ship. It's literally, the areas I've done is automatic gun reloading. I've given it the best ammunition I can. It's got increased shells, but that's because auto runs through the shells a lot more quickly. And therefore it would have been a standard. It's one of the things, again, the British were working on when they were working on automatic guns, and they were trying to work towards, everyone was trying to work towards automatic guns. So please note, again, this is nothing technological wise which they weren't trying to do. They were noting that they were going to have to increase the ammunition loads. And one of the factors was, well, you know, if we increase the ammunition load, we have a lot less crew per gun. Because if I take the guns down to enhanced, that's still listed as 125 crew. Helpful. No. Enhanced, 125 crew. Standard, 125 crew. Automatic should be a lot less than 125 crew. It should be, because basically you start to go from needing crew to run the guns to crew to maintain the guns. And magazines, and basically keep everything working as it's supposed to. So, I did promise, though, the Duke of York. Now, this is someone's wet dream fantasy, basically, of what the King George V could have been like. And if, honestly, again, this is the point at which I try to make with Chatfield, is if the auto guns had paid off, if they had managed to work out a way to fit 4 quadruple auto gun, 14-inch gun turrets to a King George V design within the weight limit, so they had been able to tote around 16, 14-inch guns with auto firing and the armor and stats which they actually historically did have, and were able to do that, Lord help anyone who engaged them. Now please note, this ship is chonky. She is chonky. I fully admit she is chonky. And she's capable of doing 15,994 kilometers at a cruising speed of 18 knots, which compared to the historical King George V's, well, they could do 15,600 nautical miles, or 28,900 kilometers at 10 knots. So I'm choosing to believe that transposes across, but I know there are issues with that. I also have spread out the 5.3 inches it is on this, because I can't do 5 1/4, fire to extend down, and to take into account there is this. That does have an impact on her. And I've had to, again, modify some of the aft belt and aft deck a little bit to deal with the fact that the, well, the weight, basically. The weight. But let's launch, and let's see what happens. Vice Admiral Maximilian von Spee. Quite true. You must not forget that I am quite homeless. I cannot reach Germany. We possess no other secure harbour. I must fight my way through the seas of the world, doing as much mischief as I can, until my ammunition is exhausted, or a foe far superior in power succeeds in catching me. But it will cost the wretches dearly before they take me down. He was as good as his word. Now, again, on the save ammo. Apparently we're already at the range at which we can engage. We are. Okay. There are a lot of shells on this ship. And it can fire 16 a time. It does help that I know what I'm fighting, so I do know that that is a Yamato class, and I know it's currently heading away from me. So that's fine, I can reduce this down a bit. And I can reduce this down a tad. Let's take it down to 22 knots. Now, this is really what the British, what Chatfield certainly would have loved the King George V to be. And honestly, I do think if this had been possible, then I'm fairly sure Henderson would have wanted the 12, 16-inch gun version of it. I just know the way that sort of that mind thought. Preferably 12, 16.5-inch guns, probably. But still, if you could have built a 14-inch autoloader that was fully automatic and keep up this rate of fire, being as accurate and as consistent and as constant as this is, at this range, you would have had a very, very different World War II. Because honestly, there is nothing that existed in World War II which could have fought it. I always have the speed, they can cut down the range, perhaps. But that isn't going to help them that much. Let's see if the guns start to turn. If the guns start to turn, then I know I've got too close a range. But she's sinking due to excessive already. Yeah. Basically, that's the methodology. You get close enough to turn the ship into a fiery ball of wreckage. January 1940. So yes, basically, if you want to make a 14-inch gun ship work in World War II as a modern something to build, what you need to do is manage to have a caliber which is far greater than anyone else can build. You have to accept that it is going to cause barrel wear, especially once you have super heavy shells. But if you can, and you can get an autoloader, so you can get that rate of fire, and you can get 16 of them, or even 12 will do, but 16, you would create a ship which, compared to other contemporaries, would have actually scared the bejesus out of them. Now, I can change this to Germany, where I am fairly sure I have my Tirpitz ready to go. If my Tirpitz hasn't been lost in the latest update of some kind. No. There she is. My 15-inch 45. Yep, this is my Tirpitz. And we can launch it again. And we can fight with the Duke of York. Save ammunition again. And of course, being a German vessel, this immediately is charging straight at me. But its maximum range of its 15-inch guns is 25 kilometers. If I keep it at 30 kilometers range, I can fire it all day and it can't fire back. And 30 kilometers for me is half my range. So again, you're asking a gun to fire at half its range. The accuracy level does go up. The likelihood of hits therefore goes up, because I'm firing at half my theoretical maximum range. And again go down to cruising speed. And the warship is on fire. Now at cruising speed, this vessel should be able to catch me. It's certainly fast enough to. And again, please note, this is not getting perfect hits. I'm not hitting with all my salvos. This is one of the ideas that comes through, you know, modern technology. Yeah, we can make them all hit. Well, I suppose you could if you added in, I don't know, some form of laser guidance. Maybe you had a swordfish or something orbiting up at high enough altitude that the AA guns on this ship couldn't hit, and it painted it with a laser. Yeah, you could probably get 100%, and you had the guidance packages on the shells. You'd have to have some sort of probably Sabo style protection. So reality is, instead of getting the full 14-inch shell, you'd have something which, I don't know, was kind of like the Kingfisher in anti-submarine warfare shell, which has been developed recently, where you have bits would come off, you know, bits that protect the guidance mechanism would drop away mid-flight, and maybe you'd have fins pop out from a sort of Sabo section. You know, a kind of cut down section at the rear, so the bits that protect it going through the barrel, going through the sort of the trauma of launch, of firing, would be gone. And then it could do the accuracy. Now that would be a slightly less heavy shell when it hits, and it'd be slightly less likely to do the massive damage. But let's be honest, that would probably be a guaranteed hit at 60 kilometers range. Let's think about that. 60 kilometers. If you can guarantee you're going to hit your target every single time at 60 kilometers, you're going to build that gun. You're going to build that shell. And yeah, first round you'll go, well, the first round when it hits is not going to penetrate the armor. Doesn't matter. I guarantee I hit, and with the laser designations, the odds are I hit in the exact right place again. So yeah, I'm going to hit it again. And the second salvo, that will penetrate all so much. When the second salvo penetrates, there probably won't be much requirement for the third salvo to hit, but that'll be already on its way. And that's the good thing about an autoloader system. The first, second, third, fourth salvos could well be on their way before I even had to worry about it. And this is what a 14-inch shell firing auto is able of doing. Now, this is, of course, as I've said before, and it's a mild rant of mine, what Chatfield was dreaming of. And the trouble was, it wasn't technologically possible at the time. They are just not viable at the time to do that. You know, you have based it on this idea that you can achieve this, and you've gone with a 14-inch, but the 14-inch gun that you produce is not an auto-firer. It's not able to keep up this rate of fire. It's not able. You haven't made it long enough to have this level of range advantage. So you've just given yourself a weaker hand, which you didn't need to. And you can see this in some of the arguments Chatfield is making. He is thinking about this future system that he feels is just around the corner. The trouble is, it's not. It's nowhere near the corner. So he really was right when he says, you could have built a 14-inch battleship that would have ruled the waves. Trouble is, is if someone turned around and then made a 16-inch gun with these same advantages, at which point you would not be able to rule the worlds. Or even worse, someone made an 18-inch gun with these advantages. Or, you've seen my Colossus, a 20-inch gun with these advantages. 12 20-inch guns. Yeah. And before anyone turns around and goes, no, they wouldn't. There are nations in the world in the world in sort of in 1940s and 1930s, and there are nations even to this day who consider budgets things which happen to other people. If they want it, they will invest in it and will build it. And they don't care about paying people because they'll pay them if they want to pay them, and if they don't feel like paying them, they'll do other things to make them work for themselves. Work for them. Now, that doesn't lead to the best technology, but the trouble is, the countries which will do it the way which probably will lead to the best technology have to respond to that. That's the whole problem with tech races and defense races in terms of defense spending. In that the person, you have to respond to their stated capabilities. You can't presume that their capabilities don't exist as stated, because if you do and then you find out they are, then you lose the war. And if you lose the war, that's lots of people dead because of your belief. Your failure to believe your enemy is actually talking the truth. That's a problem for you to deal with. It's not a good thing for you to deal with either. So you have to design your defences and design your capabilities based on what their claims are. So if they claim to have an 18-inch gun that's capable of firing 60 kilometres, 80 or 70 kilometres, and hitting targets, you have to build something which can outfight that. Now, how it's going to outrange and outfight that can be up to you. You might go with a missile system. You might go, right, now we can't build a gun system that's better, so let's go with a missile system. Let's go with an offset advantage. Let's go with a carrier. Carrying, with aircraft. But the trouble is, then you've got to be confident your system is going to work. The odds are, when you look at it, how do people tend to think about combating subs? Do they think about frigates? Well, frigates are a very useful system of doing it, and surface ships are, but the amount of times I hear, the same argument comes out as with tanks. The best way of countering a tank is a better tank. The best way of countering a submarine is a better submarine. And you're right. The best way, but it's not the only way. And it might not be the cost-effective way for your particular nation to deal with it, and deal with that threat. So you have to think these things through. In the nicest way, the point I'm making, and the point of all this technology, is that the 14-inch gun works. If all the other technology around it works as well. If it doesn't, then you've gambled everything on a piece of paper, well, the hope for a piece of paper, and the hope for a promise, which sound rather less useful when you put it like that. Right then. I think it's time to close and take out. Well, you've been doing this at 40 kilometers range. Admittedly, you can do that when dealing with this one, because it's a lot less well armoured than the Yamato, but let's close the range down to roughly 30 kilometers. Because again, it's got 15-inch guns, so frankly I'm less worried about it than It's actually turning away. Probably sensible. You still think you're fighting a destroyer? No, it is battleship. I was saying DD there for a second. You have recognized you're fighting a destroyer, a battleship. Yeah. I think they're running as fast as they can, honestly. Which is not unsensible. But yeah, they're not. They're still at 100% flotation. Their citadel's still surviving, so they're still able to float. They're just. I wouldn't say really able to fight. I think they've lost some of their ammunition. Ooh. Might gonna lose some more ammunition. Yeah, this is not a good scenario for them. Yeah, their 15 shells are firing back. And now my 5.25s are firing as well. That's slightly more worrying. Does have the advantage that, let's see, the fore and end of this ship is basically equivalent to its entire broadside. Oh, yeah. I think it should now be in range of all 60. Oh, good lord, they've managed to do some damage on my ship with a hit. Yes, they really have. Steering damage. But their main gun's been destroyed. Let's see what they are in. Yeah, the reality is this ship will not be fighting at this point. It should not be anywhere near fighting at this point. But this one is... Well, the opponent's sunk, and this one needs to do some damage control. It happens. I don't know. Hope you found that useful. And pass back to my previous conclusion. I wanted to finish this by discussing what would change. Well, First of all, what would need to change for us to have modern guns like that? Well, if some power had kept building ships with large guns, even if they'd added missiles on, etc. Let's say this is a Stalingrad-class battlecruiser. Let's say the Soviets had built these. And they then built another generation. And even the modern Kirovs had all those missiles, but also had big guns on them as well. Then, I'm sorry. You can sit there and I'm sure a lot of people will go, well, militarily they don't make sense. We could sink them with the missiles. The big guns don't matter. No, you're correct about all that, but the imagery is that it would require that the politicians would all be... Okay. I'm going to put this on first. Basically, the gun length and size would be a national substitution for another measuring contest, which I'm sorry to say, but it does seem to me quite a lot of the political class does get into. I mean, it happens. So whilst thinking with the logical, normal brain of it, suddenly we go, well, do we really need guns that big for modern warfare at this precise time and all these sort of things? You would be quite right to make a case of, it's not necessary, we don't need... The reality is, if that size has a big, massive gun, which is super long and very fat, you know what your side is going to do as well. We all do, okay? So, basically, the entire history of the world would change very greatly if Stalin had survived and somehow this idea of having these big gunships had stayed a part of the Soviet Union philosophy up until the present day. And then kept in Russian, but also it would probably then become part of Chinese naval policy, etc. And therefore, you would probably have, if you were announcing, as currently is carrying on with several debates, we are getting rid of cruisers, but they have ships which are called cruisers. Is this not a dereliction of duty? Insert thing here. And you can quite sensibly argue yes, but also you can sensibly argue that the US Navy hasn't had cruisers since they got rid of nuclear-powered ships. Not in the true sense of the word. They've had destroyer leaders, which were a form of cruiser, originally when they were conceived, but by the time you get to the TCOs, and I've argued this many times before, so I'm not bothered about arguing again, are to an extent not. They are not they are not cruisers. They are destroyer leaders. And you can call them cruisers for the important classification of who's going to be in charge of them, etc., and all those things, and their role within a group, yes. But they are destroyer leaders. They are... And they're not even... It's going to sound strange, but a cruiser, it's one of its one of its really important roles is being able to do the independent cruising as a global presence ship. As something which can turn up as a substitute for its group. And I've always felt the Arleigh Burke was actually slightly better in that role than the TCO. And the Arleigh Burke is unashamedly a destroyer. Please, no one ever thinks. The Arleigh Burke doesn't pretend to be anything it isn't. It is shamelessly a general-purpose destroyer. And I have a lot of love and respect for that design because of that. I think that design is old. I do think in the nicest way that the US Navy has managed to fudge and muck up its 3 proposed successors. The Arleigh Burke is kind of like the modern swordfish, in that there are successors which come along and they do have benefits and negatives and benefits. The Albacore had a lot of benefits, but it never caught on in the imagination and even in the Navy as the swordfish did, because of the teething issues it had had when it was newer. And that meant by the time the Albacore reached its stride, there were a lot better aircraft available in service. Which is why the Albacore gets the reputation it does, and why, if we look at the Zumwalts, well, they would have certainly been improved if big gun technology had kept pace, because then, who knows, railguns might have been something that's been around for a long time. I would say there are problems with barrel wear, etc., with railgun technology. But it's one of the interesting things is it's mostly problems with barrel wear is it's going to sound strange. It's compared, when they're comparing battleware, to things that we don't normally use nowadays. Because if you're keeping up ships of this size with guns of this size, and you've been thinking about barrelware, and you probably railgun might not work in sort of the 8 and 6 inch categories. But if you're talking about the 12 and 15 inch category, maybe 16 inch category, you might well have found that the railgun competes quite well with the barrelware of firing the extra long barrel length that we would be currently operating. It would be interesting to have seen. It would be an interesting technological avenue to have gone down. I think it could have had a lot of interesting repercussions technologically for the development of our understanding and knowledge of things. I also think it would have been advantageous from the point of view of resupply at sea and replenishment at sea. Because the big problem we're currently working on is how do we reload VLS at sea? And is it even possible with modern missiles? Because they are quite so delicate. Which sounds funny for saying about something which is literally fired out of a VLS tube on a rocket, blasts up the aircraft at several times the speed of sound, and blows up. But there is a difference between doing that and going through the rough, tumble, bash, smash, crash of transfer at sea and then reloading into VLS at sea and doing all that. There is a difference. So, thank you very much for watching. And there does seem to be a theme developing in these videos while I'm away in Australia. So I'm going to add for this one a little question for you. I'd love to hear what you think different navies would have today if such vessels had kept going. You know, would some navies be known as the big gun navies because they didn't have aircraft carriers, they just had the big gun ships? Because you can say, well, you know, the big gun is a defective carrier and all these things. Yeah, but the big gun is probably cheaper and logistically more simple to operate than an aircraft carrier. So there are some navies which would go for, we are a total capability navy, i.e. France, Britain, as well as America, possibly Italy as well, quite possibly Italy. In sort of Western nations which would want to have the whole mix. I wouldn't be surprised if Brazil did, but Japan, probably similar issues as having aircraft carriers, but they might be allowed the gun. People might have been happier for them to have the big guns than the aircraft carriers, conversely. So whilst they're now getting aircraft carrying destroyers, through deck destroyers, they might have actually been allowed big gun ships for longer. Of course, Russia would have wanted to go full service, and I highly doubt China would be anything less than the full service it's pushing now in terms of the full spectrum capabilities. But we've also got countries like Turkey, Greece, for whom maybe such a ship would have been more of a practical and more viable solution to their problems. A missile farm with big guns and lots of radar, lots of sensors and communications gear, than an aircraft carrier. I would love to hear what you think about these things and what you think people would have. Thank you very much for watching, and take care. And thank you, Greg Wake, for the proposal, this particular topic. It's a cool one. Why does that keep shrinking?